Welcome to the Arena Decklist Podcast. I'm Jerry Thompson, joined, as always, by Brian Gottlieb, and we have a massive show to the point where I don't think we can mess around, dude.
Fine, let's do it. Talk about Magic cards. Go.
We have so many, and the set is like actually not bad. So
I think it's really good. I think it's better than not bad. It's really good. I'm really excited. I had a moment today and like it was so foreign to me because I hadn't felt it in so long. And I'm like, what is this that I'm feeling? It was excitement about standard. I just like wanted to build a bunch of standard decks and like wanted to play a standard tournament. And I don't think I felt like that since Eldraine released. So
are we going to talk about this for 5 minutes?
Nope.
Five minutes of very valuable time?
Nope. Let's go. Cards.
All right. We are, I don't know, just kind of going in sort of random order, not sorted by color, kind of sorted by rarity. So we're going to do the high end stuff first and make our way down.
I like it.
Starting with the Adversary Cycle. Cycle of mythic rare creatures. 4 of them are 2 mana. The green one is 3 mana. I will start with the white one. Intrepid Adversary. 1 dub, 3/1. Creature human scout. Lifelink. When this enters the battlefield, you may pay 1 dub. So 2 mana total. Any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many Valor counters on this. Creatures you control get +1/+1 for each Valor counter on this. So 2 mana, 3/1 with lifelink, and then kind of has like a multi-kicker thing.
Mm-hmm. Are we just doing one at a time?
Yeah. Okay. We got to talk about the cards individually, right? No?
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, so
I was just like, read the card. You're like, like, yeah, that's the text of the card.
Yeah,
that's all I have to say.
Well, I think it's interesting as a cycle because like as a cycle of mythic rares, I do find these kind of disappointing. But that being said, I think all of them, well, most of them, you can make up a pretty reasonable home for them and they'll do something powerful in that spot. And I'm almost certain that any deck that has a sort of, it's not quite an aggressive leaning plan, but like aggressive tendencies, wants to play creatures, wants to attack and block. Any deck that's doing that type of stuff should at least look at these things because they do scale so well. And the base bodies are almost always good too. Now, when you get into things like tribal synergies, I think these really kick into high gear and could be super strong cards. This one, base stats are okay. 3/1 lifelink for 2. Like I've been happy with that in the past. It doesn't scale super hard after the first activation because the problem is it remains fragile throughout. I think that's my biggest beef with Intrepid Adversary. It's always going to be vulnerable. But still, if you draw this in the late game in your small white aggressive deck and you flood it out and have 6 mana, this could be a really big swing. And I think decks will usually be interested in a copy of this card. Of more note, it's a human. So if you want to go into older formats, that's interesting. And also
works with Aether Vial.
It works with Aether Vial. I think that's really important for these cards because there's another tribal synergy that is often an Aether Vial deck that looks to use these adversaries. And it makes sense to me that is kind of a niche application. And this is maybe a bad additional Thalia's Lieutenant in some scenarios. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah, this one is awkward because it needs to stay in play. It's not like, oh, you're getting value necessarily if this just dies. So not the greatest, but white decks have things like Loyal Warhound, you have Faceless Haven, and Cave of the whatever dragon, Frost Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
So you have between like those and this, now you just have like a bunch of mana sources and incentives for mana sources, which I think is really cool.
Yes. And it lets you build decks in the new mode where your white aggressive deck has 26 lands, and that's perfect. That's what you want to do.
Blue one, Spectral Adversary, 1/U, 2/1, creature spirit, flash flying. When this enters the battlefield, you may pay 1 and U any number of times. Again, 2 mana. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on this, then up to that many other target artifacts, creatures, and or enchantments phase out.
So I think the best thing to do with this is alpha striking. Again, I talk tribal synergies. So Spirits is a deck, often uses Aether Vial. Obviously, this is on curve for them. It plays with Flash, which is extremely important for Spirits. And I think you can get at some tricksy things with this at end of turn, really blow up your opponent's blocking plans, which is important. And then when you're doing Aether Vial stuff, removing 2 blockers, I think will often be extremely powerful. So that is a game-winning effect in a lot of spots. And you're adding a very big body to the battlefield as well. So again, I really like this in the tribal framework. It doesn't quite work as like Wrath Protection because unfortunately this body enters and you can phase out your other stuff and maybe protect something, but you'd give up this. And you're
I think
not gonna
that's
look
fine. Like,
are you sure? Like that's a big mana investment at that point. And like how many of your creatures in the spirit deck are going to be worth investing that much mana and protecting them?
so consider Supreme Verdict in Modern, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about, Ether Vial Spirits, whatever. And I think that if your opponent casts Supreme Verdict and you vial this in and like save 2 of your things, that is well worth it. It's way better than like letting it resolve and then doing this, right? So
Yeah.
I think that that's completely fine. And again, you're not playing a bunch of these probably, but Supreme Verdict against Spirits is one of the best cards.
Yeah.
Because there's very few ways to stop it, and this actually does a reasonable job of doing it. That isn't like playing Rootborn Defenses or something like that is just bad with the rest of your deck. Like this actually fits your deck.
Yeah, that's the baseline, right? Is at least it's a spirit. And if you have the access to that aggressive use that I talked about, as well as maybe this backdoor defensive capability, then I'm fine with it. It's not the best at any of those things, but it does it all while having the meaningful body attached to it. So again, spot play tribal, and then maybe you can find a home for this in like blue-red tempo-y decks, which I do think are a real thing. So I would at least give it a look there.
Rattle Chain showed up more than I thought it would outside of Spirit decks.
It really did, yeah.
And this is doing a lot of the same stuff. Tainted Adversary is the black one. 1 and a B for a 2/3 zombie with Death Touch. When this enters the battlefield, you may pay 2B any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on this, then create twice that many 2/2 black zombie creature tokens with Decayed. This strikes me as kind of like the Liliana's Mastery aspect of whatever zombies is going to look like. I mean, I've looked at zombie decks. They have cards that are playable, but like the deck itself doesn't look great. But this is definitely something that they're missing.
It's some glue. And I think like even if you're just looking at pure stats on this card,
2 mana, 2/3 Death Touch is not bad.
Sure. I think that's very playable in a lot of spots. And then when you get to the 5 mana version, what you're actually getting out of it is 6 power.
7, because you get a counter.
7 power, right. Very true. So that's a great return on 5 mana. It's split across 3 bodies, so any kind of tribal pumps you're using get ample effects. So all these numbers work out for me. And again, I think the baseline is there. I think 2/3 Death Touch for 2 is going to be acceptable in a lot of scenarios for zombies. That allows you to play this in a bunch of spots.
A lot of decks I've been building, during preview season, I tend to lean towards like, there's graveyard strategies or like, in this case, zombies or whatever. So I'm looking at a lot of those decks, and this has been like a solid 2 of in a lot of my decks. And that seems reasonable to me in actual zombies where they don't have a top end. I think you probably just play 4,
Sure.
Yep. So it just depends on your deck composition.
By that.
Red 1, Bloodthirsty Adversary, 1R, 2/2 haste. When this enters the battlefield, you may pay 2R any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on this, then exile up to that many target instants and or sorcery cards with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard and copy them. You may cast any number of the copies without paying their mana cost. I think this might be the first time I actually read this. I knew it was a 2 mana 2/2 haste, but like this ability is not bad.
So I at first hated on this card because I'm like, well, what are you going to do? Return a shock? Big deal.
Yeah.
2/2 haste, not going to be good enough. And like that was my assessment. And I was like, oh, this is probably not good enough for a Mythic Rare. And then I remembered how much Goblin Dark Dwellers I played, which I probably shouldn't have been doing, but I did. And I think people still continue to do in a lot of spots. And this is like modal Goblin Dark Dwellers that scales better into the late game. And granted, that card was subsidized a lot by Colligan's Command, which we don't have in standard. But again, the modal nature, you get vampires, which we believe are going to be an important tribal body. You get this 2/2 haste for 2, which is fine-ish. You get sometimes they're just rebuying a lethal shock. Plenty of other spells to look at. Again, the red-blue-ish tempo-y shell, where you're going to be very spell reliant because of some cards we're going to talk about later on. I could see this potentially fitting. So another solid card. I guess my biggest beef with the Adversary Cycle is that this feels way more like a rare cycle to me than a mythic cycle. And
yeah.
I don't think they're like bad for mythics. It just feels slightly below what I would expect. And that's what sort of put me off them at first. But as you look at each individual card, they all have their uses and are all good enough. Maybe we got one more to go, and we'll see where that one falls.
It's mythic because it's complicated, where it's like an ETB, pay, whatever, any number of, it's just like a lot of words and something they haven't done before. I think that's why they're mythic. Yeah,
I understand that, and I know that is how they do things, but I also know I could grab 10 rares from the sets that are actually more complicated in the play pattern. Like, this reads more complicated. It's got the small text. It's got a lot of words, but once you play with it once, you just get it. There are far more complicated things going on here.
Yeah, I agree with that. But okay, so 5 mana, 3/3 haste, probably kill a thing. That's not bad, especially when you're talking about it being a 2 mana 2/2 haste.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and I don't know. I don't know of any like Ancestral Vision type of nonsense that you can get up to in standard. I don't know what the best thing to flashback with this is. I haven't really looked. And I don't think this is going to like hit back to modern or anything. So I think that this is very solid. It's good to have.
With you.
Green 1, Primal Adversary. This is a 3 mana one. 2G, 4/3 trample. When this enters the battlefield, you may pay 1G any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on this, then up to that many target lands you control become 3/3 wolf creatures with haste that are still lands. This is potentially a lot of damage.
It is. I think this is the worst of the cycle. And that being said, I think it's still completely playable. I think like 3 mana, 4/3 trample in green aggressive decks is going to pay you most of the time. You're going to be happy with that, especially considering the fact that, again, we have another tribe that matters. We've seen wolves, werewolf, lords all across this set. It seems like that is going to be part of standard. So I sort of buy this being fine there. And then if you get into those late game scenarios where you're just flush with mana, you have a fireball in your deck all of a sudden. And that's a good place to be in when you have a fail state that is entirely acceptable and then upside that just wins you the game. Those are the type of cards I'm always almost going to be interested in.
What's up with lands becoming wolves?
I don't know. I don't know how you justify that one.
That's kind of rhetorical. I don't really care. Okay. So we can just move on.
Good, because I don't have an answer for you on that one.
Teferi, who slows the sunset. This is a mythic rare planeswalker that was previewed late and was just kind of like snuck in there, which leads me to believe that they don't think it's good. But 2W, 4 starting loyalty, planeswalker Teferi, +1, choose up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, and up to 1 target land. Untap the chosen permanents you control. You gain 2 life. -2, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom. -7, you get an emblem with untap all permanents you control during each opponent's untap step, and you draw a card during each opponent's draw step.
Okay, here's where I'm at this card. I agree when you read this, doesn't seem great. And my first instinct was to be underwhelmed. Then I started thinking about, well, what's the best this +1 ever looks? And what if it's +3 mana? Then I think it's really, really strong, actually. And then you can also make some scenarios where it's +4 mana that I'm starting to look at now. We're going to talk about more cards that maybe play well with Teferi as we go through this spoiler season. But I've been thinking a lot about how to build these Teferi decks. And I think if you have some kind of Bant deck that is just playing towards a ever-growing mid-range game where you have spells that scale. Again, we have more of those to talk about, and we've already talked about some Bant spells that scale very well. And you have spots where you +3 mana on this +1, and in the fail state, you just go ahead and look at the top 3 cards of your library and find something important. I think all of that's good and acceptable, and it requires a lot of build around. It requires a lot of effort, but if you put in that effort, I can buy Teferi actually being archetype defining. And I think that's where planeswalkers should fall. They should require that kind of effort. They shouldn't just be Teferi Time Raveler. This card's unbeatable, play it in every deck.
Yeah. What artifacts are there?
The one that I am looking at now is the Celestus. That's how to get sort of the most upside out of this, because that is both a mana rock and has additional abilities, allows you to filter your hand a little bit. And we don't have this on our list to talk about, so I guess I'll just read this card real quick. The Celestis, 3 colorless legendary artifact. If it's neither day nor night, it becomes day as the Celestis enters the battlefield. Tap, add 1 mana of any color. 3 tap. If it's night, it becomes day. Otherwise, it becomes night. Activate only as a sorcery. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, you gain 1 life. You may draw a card. If you do, discard a card.
That's not terrible.
Not terrible. I agree. That's why it's not on the list to talk about more, because I don't think outside of playing it alongside of Teferi, there's really all that much to do with it. But maybe we'll still see something else in the artifact spot. I would have to do a deep dive through what's currently in standard to see if there's anything else. But there's no 2 mana rocks now that I know of. And I don't know that we'll ever see one of those again. So I expect that it's going to be hard to do better than the Celestis. But I am hoping something else turns up.
Yeah, I mean, when you start to look at this like a 1 mana planeswalker, obviously it's a lot better, right?
Yeah.
But it's also going to be difficult to get into that situation. And in the case of the Celestis, it's like, well, you have to devote probably an entire turn worth to like playing this thing first. So like you are like Teferi is going to be a lot cheaper, but you're still like investing mana up front to get that thing into play. So yeah, I could see it where it's like, you know, you're playing some mana dorks, some other things that can defend the planeswalker well. Obviously, it doesn't defend itself at all. And yeah, you just kind of use this as like your explosive vegetation or whatever that can also impulse and stuff. Like I could see it. I could see like a deck being built around it.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of playing the Nissa role where Nissa would lead you to Hydroid Crisis. You need something like that where you're ramping towards something efficient, but something that can also be played in the early game.
We kind of have that though.
We do have that. And we'll talk about that more. So,
all right. Next up, Sigardian Savior, 3/3, 3/3 creature angel flying. When this enters the battlefield, if you cast it, return up to 2 target creature cards with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is still good. This is still very good.
But with a safety valve. And
yes.
I think there's safety valves all over this set, and I'm so happy for them.
It's gas. It reads so bad a lot of the time.
It does, but it's so necessary at this point. Like you saw what happened when we took all the safety valves off. And I think a lot of that was in the name of cleanliness and trying to get cards to be less wordy. But when you're just jamming words onto cards anyway, I would so much rather you put these safety valves on them.
Yeah, like Nantuko Husk or whatever looks super clean. It's like, oh, cool, right? And then it's like, oh, well, this is really busted with Pattern of Rebirth into Symbiotic Worm or whatever. You know, like people find a way.
Yes.
And in the case of Revelark, you know, a lot of the time it was like maybe you just cast it or you evoke it, but like there were decks that were like blinking it too. And at this point, we have so many cards. It wouldn't surprise me if like, you know, they wanted to do something like this, but they don't want you to like Charming Prince it or whatever. Right. So I get this. This makes sense. And you get paid up front. So this is not bad.
You do. And I think the payoff is fine. I don't have a lot of decks that want to play this right now. And I'm not like really building around this card. I thought it was more interesting to talk about for what it can't do rather than what it can do. I think it's a good discussion point. But that being said, you can still find a home for this card. And even if it's just like, this is my sideboard plan in my white aggressive deck against decks that are trying to run me out of resources and I have to go long, great. I am happy if a card like that can matter again.
Yeah, same. Lier, Disciple of the Drowned, 3 UU, 3/4, legendary creature, human wizard. Spells can't be countered. Each instant and sorcery card
safety valve.
Yeah. Each instant and sorcery card in your flashback in your graveyard has flashback. Flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost.
I was sort of low on this card until I started looking at it as just like Past in Flames. And then I think I realized it does have some potential in older formats and in deeper formats as a new way to get access to that effect. It's probably worse in a lot of instances to put it onto a body, but still it's too powerful to ignore. I don't really see a future for this as a fair card, but I could be surprised by it. I mean, maybe there's just enough value that can be gained from completely unlocking your graveyard where it can go off. But I am extremely thankful for that safety valve, because if you were just churning counter spells out of your graveyard, this card would not be very fun at all.
Yeah, that's fair. I didn't really think about it that way. It was like, I kind of looked at it like, oh, you can't play counter spells with this. and just sort of stop there. But yeah, it makes sense that you shouldn't be able to like draw new everything.
Yep.
I think this card stinks, and I think that, like we talked about Enduring Angel last week, and all the stuff that you said about that holds true to this.
Yep.
So,
any interest in it as like your, your Past in Flames analog, where you just are able to go off from your graveyard?
Why? What format are we doing that in, where you can't just play Past in Flames?
Historic would be my answer. I mean, I don't know.
But there's no rituals,
right? But are there other spots where comboing like that is efficient from your graveyard? I would have to really think about that. I mean, obviously we have things like Mind's Desire, but we've done that mostly from the battlefield, so I don't think we want this. But like I said, too powerful of an effect to ignore. And if you ever have even the slightest hint of ritualing, this will let you go off in Historic. So
Moonveil Regent, 3R, 4/4, creature dragon, flying. Whenever you cast a spell, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw a card for each of that spell's colors. When this dies, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of colors among permanents you control.
So here's the statement I want to make about this. And as I make it, I realize I don't know if I can actually do it. I'm going to do it anyway, though. This is my show. Do what I want. I think this card's way better than people think it is. Now, I hesitate because I am not actually sure what people think of this card. It just doesn't feel hype. Like nobody's really talking about it. And the only real mention I've seen of it is in conjunction with things like the Omnath decks or the Niv decks. And I think that's mostly nonsense. I'm not super interested in that. Where I do think this card is appealing, it's just like the top end of my aggressive decks curve. And now I've got an Experimental Frenzy on a stick if my casting costs are low enough. And I'm playing with an empty hand anyway, and I just want to burn through a bunch of 1 mana spells. That sounds great to me. I think there's a lot of scenarios where you're happily discarding your hand and picking up new spells and playing 3 or 4 spells in a turn. And again, like there's potentially some combo potential where you just sort of go off, and that would require you to be able to, probably flashback some spells, right? When you get stuck with your land in your hand. But thankfully, this set has some flashbacks. So I think this card has a lot of potential to do busted things. And then it's just a really good 4/4 flyer for 4 mana that also doubles up as Experimental Frenzy in spots where your red deck really needs card advantage.
This card is gas. I almost wrote about this. And I did mention it in the article that I wrote about because I think it is very good. And I don't know, we're talking about like Lier and Enduring Angel, these 5 mana things that like don't really impact the battlefield on the turn they ETB. This thing has a dice trigger on top of it. Like if it was just like an engine, it's like, okay, yeah, this is worth considering, right? And it's 4 toughness, so that gets it out of a decent amount of removal spells and stuff. But it's like, no, even if they kill it, hopefully you're taking something down with it, which is awesome.
I agree with you. And it really doesn't seem like much of a stretch to imagine you have like some multicolor cards in your deck and you're occasionally drawing 2 off this. And, in older formats, maybe you can even go deeper and play some hybrid cards and very reliably go ahead and trigger Moonveil Regent for multiple cards. So I think there's just a world of potential here. And the thing that sells me on it, again, is just the downside guarantee. 4/4 flyer for 4, acceptable. Experimental Frenzy analog, completely okay with me. I just want to play copies of this card in most of my red decks, I think.
Yeah, just have a low enough curve where you're going to be able to empty your hand and actually take advantage of this thing. If you have some gold cards to get, like more looks, basically, so you're not like, oh, play a red spell, draw a land. Okay, now I'm stuck. Play more gold cards if you can, or, flashback things, stuff like that, to just make sure that this doesn't end, and you should be golden. I think this card's awesome.
Going to pull a lot of card advantage out of this card for sure.
This might be my favorite card so far, honestly.
Good. I'm glad. So do you agree with my assessment that people don't seem appropriately hyped about this card?
Yeah, I mean, occasionally, like you go through the previews and you like read a card and you read it again, you start thinking about it, and it's like, oh, this might be kind of busted. And then I wrote my article last night, so I was like building a bunch of decks and like actually looking at things. And the more I thought about this and looked at like decks it could go in and stuff, it was like, yeah, this does look really good. And I've not seen a single person talk about it. So it's kind of weird, but like that happens during preview season. So
it does. Especially now, like preview season is different than it used to be. And it's harder to get a sense of like what the community as a whole is thinking. I am telling you what I'm doing right now, though. I feel like you could guess what I'm doing right now. going to look at the price of this card.
Yeah, I thought about it, but was too lazy.
Because if you ask me what the best mythic in the set that we've seen thus far is,
if it's like $6, I would buy them.
$12.
Yeah,
I mean it's
not bad.
Yeah, it's less expensive than Arlen, less expensive than
Arlen's really good though.
Arlen is also good, less expensive than Lier, so there's a slam dunk.
Well, Lier's a commander card.
Okay, yeah, this makes it hard to talk about the value of cards now because that does change everything. Less expensive than Ren and 7. I like Ren and 7 too. Okay, so I don't think that price is all that out of line. It kind of tracks with most of what else is going on here, but I do think this is the best mythic we've seen thus far.
Yeah, I think Ren and 7 is really good. This is not Goldspan Dragon level. Like you can just put it into basically any deck or whatever. You do kind of have to build around it, but I think that's fine. And I could easily see this being played in like Gruul or Jund or just like Jeskai, whatever. Like you can put this in a lot of different decks. So I think it will see a lot of play. Anyway.
Yep.
The Meathook Massacre. XBB.
Wildest name ever for a Magic card, by the way.
Yes. XBB, Legendary Enchantment. When the Meathook Massacre, normally I'll say this, but I just want to say the name again. When the Meathook Massacre enters the battlefield, each creature gets -X until end of turn. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Whenever a creature an opponent controlled dies, you gain 1 life. So like bad sweeper, Black Sun Zenith type of thing, but for 2 mana, it is a Blood Artist.
This is it. This is the missing piece for Vesperlark. I'm quite sure of it, actually.
It's legendary. So if you're doing like fair things, you can't stack up on them. But in Vesperlark, you just need 1.
Yep. I don't want to do fair things anymore. I mean, we talked a lot about the Vesperlark combo in Historic over the past few weeks and my efforts to get it to work. And at first, like I said, I was pretty cold on it. And I think, again, these statements are harder and harder to make with the way Magic works now. I think it's mostly missing as it stands right now. I don't think people are playing all that much Vesperlark in Historic. And for the most part, rightfully so. I think there's just more powerful stuff going on. And the problems with having to put Blood Artist in all your decks means you have to play like a Blood Artist deck. You need to make that a good card if your Vesperlark deck is going to be good. And I thought I sort of solved that problem with Scurry Oak, and I still do to some extent. But this is just so much cleaner. And now we can just go ahead and play Splinter Twin. We can play Control. We can just have the Meathook Massacre as the way we trigger our combo. And it's not dead. It's a not great, but reasonable sweeper in a lot of spots. You'll certainly get use out of it if you're trying to play a longer control game. And then anytime this sits on the battlefield, you're just representing winning the game for 3 mana. And your opponent has to respect it at all points, including on turn 3. I mean, it's perfectly reasonable to go this into Evoke My Vesperlark, go ahead and Davriel's Withering, and that's it. Game's over. So that sort of power being unlocked on a piece that you can't interact with is so important. And that's going to change how you're able to play later stages of the game, because now you put Meathook Massacre into play, you play your Vesperlark, and you sit there with your 1 open mana. What does your opponent do with their removal spell? It used to be like you could try and get the Blood Artist before that happened, but you can't do that anymore. So I think this is a big game changer for the Vesperlark deck, and now being able to play a control version of it, I'm pretty excited to go back and explore it again.
Soul Guide Lantern's busted.
It's a strong Magic card. There's a lot of incentive to go ahead and play it right now, so I won't deny that. But even still, you're taxing your opponent's mana for the rest of the game, and you can have ways around that. There's whatever, Pithing Needles, artifact removal, whatever you have to do to go ahead and set the combo. If your control deck is robust enough, because you're not playing a bunch of stupid cards like Blood Artist, then you'll be able to play around all these things.
Yeah, you can just play Esper Control now. Sure.
I think that's a fine approach.
Tovolar's Huntmaster, 4GG, Human Werewolves. This is a DFC. 6/6, Daybound. When this enters the battlefield, create 2/2/2 green wolf tokens. Backside is Nightbound. When this enters the battlefield or attacks, create 2/2/2 green wolf tokens, and you can pay 2GG to have another target creature or werewolf you control fight target creature you don't control.
I mean, like, I don't want to say Grave Titan with upside, but as I think about Grave Titan,
kind of is,
and what it does, like, how is this not just better? And at first I would have sworn that you wouldn't get the the wolves if you did some kind of nonsense like reanimate it, but you do. And you still get the chance to go to Nightbound and get a 7/7. And if you have your green mana around, you can throw wolves at various creatures, pick off, whatever, Delvers or whatever could give you fits in older formats or newer formats, as it turns out. So, yep, this seems like a very real Magic card. And I was surprised to see it at rare. This feels way more Mythic than other stuff that sits at Mythic right now.
Yeah, but it's like kind of simple, kind of straightforward.
Kind of. I mean, how simple can a double face card be that has an activated ability on the back? Like,
but
and
they
puts
have
a ton of tokens onto the battlefield.
They have DFCs at common with like 2 abilities. So.
Yeah, I guess I just don't really buy the complexity arguments anymore. Like, I'm sure that is influencing things, but I'm just not sure it's important given how complex things have gotten.
Yeah.
Strong card, though.
Yeah, card is good. Card is solid. I don't know. What else do you want to say?
I don't know. I mentioned, like, I hope there's a Jund-ish mid-range deck. This could very easily be the curve topper in that.
Yeah, this is your Broodmage Dragon or whatever.
Fine with me.
Florian, Voldaren, Scion, 1 BR, 3/3, legendary creature, vampire noble, first strike. At the beginning of your post-combat main phase, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of life your opponents lost this turn. Exile one of those cards, put the rest on the bottom of your library. You may play the exiled card this turn. So this card wants you to attack them before you do anything, and then have your mana open to potentially play a follow-up thing.
See, that's where I started with this card until I realized you can also play lands with it. And then I'm like, oh, this card is actually just very good.
Yeah, but you still want to be able to, like do something with the mana afterwards, right? Like even if you are looking for a land.
Of course. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is that I don't think there's going to be many scenarios where you don't get to use this card effectively. It just seems like it's going to unlock your deck as an aggressive player, and that's so important to kind of keep the train going and keep those early beatdowns rolling for modern aggressive decks. And we already talked about how the Dragon's going to do that. I think Florian's going to do it for sort of a lower to the ground type beatdown deck that just wants to go 1-drop vampire into 2-drop vampire and to play this and now have this never ending source of card advantage. I think it's going to be a really strong position, and 3/3 first strike is fine. I think it's a completely acceptable body.
I think it's awkward that it just doesn't do anything on turn 3.
Yeah.
Like you can play it, you can attack, but like you can't, what are you going to do?
You'll never get a payoff.
Bobble.
Theoretically, I don't think there'll be a lot of that going on in standard, but yeah, that's a fair criticism of the card. I think it is strong enough to overcome that when you combine the selection with, and it could be deep selection in a lot of scenarios too. Like if you want to go ahead and fire a burn spell at your opponent to look for another burn spell, I think that'll be a pretty common line to see, and probably lethal a very good percentage of the time, especially if there's any reasonable burn floating around out there.
If you play this and connect with it on turn 4, or, connect with your other things, whatever, on turn 4, I like your spot. It's just awkward to try and get to that point.
Okay. Yeah, I want to see more of the vampire support, and I think that's coming next set. So I expect Florian will shine at that point, although we already have a couple decent other vampires accompanying Florian, so maybe we'll try and get to it early. We'll see.
Yep. Katilda, Dawnhart, Headwitch, G-Dub, 1/1, legendary creature, human warlock, protection from werewolves. Human creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, tap, add 1 mana of any of this creature's colors. And then 4G dub, tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. I don't necessarily know of, any sort of like humans looking deck that is trying to scale off a Cryptolith Rite kind of thing, but this card just kind of like fuels itself, so maybe that's fine. Or like maybe you're playing the Revel Archangel or whatever, and like that sort of big-ish top end. I don't know. This card does stuff.
There's Intrepid Adversary out there as a way to sink a bunch of mana. That is a human, so
True.
It's checking all those boxes. I think this card's existence alone requires you to go ahead and do a search for all the humans that are going to be playable. And, there's quite a few in this set. There's like Sun Gold Sentinel, and all with very fine rates, 3-2 for 2 in that case. And there's also our werewolves out there, which all start as humans. So maybe you need to go that way. There's a lot to explore with this card, and I'm pretty excited about it because this is the kind of mana output where we can start to say that B word. Things start to maybe get a little broken because you're able to just have these tremendous turns. There's Brutal Cathar out there as well, which is just like an awesome human. So I'm looking for excuses to play humans anyway, I think.
Yeah. Elite Spellbinder is also still very solid. There's a lot of good white cards, of course. The one thing that I will notice is like it's very unlikely that it's going to be broken, right? It's like unchecked. Yeah, you're doing a bunch of stuff, making mana, whatever. It depends on what you are doing with that mana and whether or not decks exist that can contain you. Basically, things with like a lot of spot removal and sweepers and stuff like that. And I think that those decks will exist. So I'm not saying the B word,
Was Cryptolith Rites a broken Magic card?
I mean, it's powerful because it breaks rules, but the decks that it's in are very easily exploitable.
Okay.
It's more exploitable than doing like graveyard stuff, right? Because graveyard stuff isn't usually free rolled on a normal card. Like sometimes you would see Scavenging Ooze or whatever. But Cryptolith Rite is like, well, people are always going to have interaction for creatures in their deck. So I think it's a lot easier to keep pinned down.
Okay. I would say that as of now, sweepers in this format aren't my favorite. Obviously, there's a lot of room for that to change. And this is just vulnerable to everything. So if your humans deck is a bunch of X1s, there are ways to punish that out there, even if the hard sweepers aren't really my favorite. So that is a pretty big point of vulnerability. I think this card is very interesting. But there's other stuff I want to do in these colors, which I expect to be more powerful than just like dumping a bunch of humans onto the battlefield. So
do you need to talk about Rite of Harmony in combination with this?
We can do that. So this, I wrote my article on Rite of Harmony this week. This card did not exist. Why don't you go ahead and read Rite of Harmony before we do that?
G-Dub instant. Whenever a creature or enchantment enters the battlefield under your control this turn, draw a card, flashback to G-Dub.
So, Glimpse of Nature, sort of. More expensive, has flashback, also triggers off of enchantments, and also is an instant. That stuff.
And tokens.
And tokens, right. All this stuff matters so much. And I think it's worth building like a green-white humans deck around Rite of Harmony because I think this card is just powerful in and of itself. But where I actually went with this card was building tokens decks. First of all, there's stuff like Battle for Bredegard, and that's a saga that puts 2 tokens into play over its first 2 turns and then creates copies of all the tokens you currently control on its final step.
And Rite is an instant,
And I sort of think like that's the reason Rite is an instant, because those cards play so well together. It seems like it's almost pointed towards it. But there's also stuff out there like Join the Dance that puts 2 human creatures into play. That has flashback. So there's all these really good token makers. Clarion Spirit comes to mind. Lots of ways to go ahead and produce a bunch of bodies onto the battlefield and sort of get real big with Rite of Harmony that I was super into. And then there's actually like a really good KO condition in that too, where I was playing, I always confuse Cleric class and Paladin class. I think I was playing Paladin class, which is the one that turns into an anthem after you invest 3 mana into it. And then it has this weird fireball ability where every creature you attack can give something +1/+1 and double strike. And so I was using this in conjunction with the white creature land to just go ahead and fireball people. And I got to the late game and 20 of them in one shot after I built up an effective enough battlefield. And it's kind of gimmicky, but also I think real and good when it's stapled onto a card advantage engine. You can just create tokens forever. So there's a lot to do in that vein with this card. I explored some Elves builds, which I think looked completely fine. And there are good mana sources out there from Elves. There's also Tyvar Kell, which has seen almost no play, but is an Elf Planeswalker, which is powerful, acceptably powerful. And then the thing I did, which was really kind of absurd, was Goldspan Dragon Runeforged Champion Rite of Harmony deck, where you just get to draw your entire deck and go off with Rite of Harmony. And I don't think it was all that hard. There's also a card whose name I'm forgetting right now, but it is a 2 colorless, 1 white creature where all of your enchantments cost 1 less. So it turns all of your runes into costing 1 mana, and it still allows you to go off with Goldspan Dragon. But in those scenarios, Rite of Harmony is amazing because you have the first cast, you start your combo, and because you're generating mana with each time you target your Goldspan Dragon, eventually you just play the flashback on this as well, and now all of your runes are drawing 3 cards a pop, and you're going to go through your deck. Like it's just an inevitability at that point, and you're going to be able to do whatever your kill condition is from that point.
You must draw a card, Brian.
You must draw a card.
You're just going to deck yourself, man.
You have to be careful. I'll give you that. But you just put a bunch of Goldspan Dragons into play and attack for some hasty damage. And I think you'll find the kill most times before you deck yourself. And again, if you need to put some kind of 1 card kill condition into there, I'm sure it's pretty easy to do so. But that just speaks to the potential that Rite of Harmony has. And anytime you can draw your deck, you have my interest. I'm paying attention during preview season. So excited to see what this card can do in both fair and unfair contexts.
It being an instant with the Saga is pretty nice. I was burned by like Beck and Call in the past.
I talked about that all over my article. I built so many Beck decks.
And so I'm skeptical, but yeah, there's like some combo-y stuff. I don't know if having like Katilda changes anything. It with Goldspan Dragon is definitely good. It starts sounding like the Lord Drakis deck, you know?
Yep.
In that sense.
Yep.
So I don't know. I could see it.
One other thing I did with this, which I just thought was interesting, and I acknowledged the deck was pretty half-baked, but if you play this in Dredge in Modern, it's actually really easy to flip your deck over on turn 3, which is probably lethal because you have 4 Bloodghast and the 4 Creeping Chills. So you can usually win if you can just flip your deck over on turn 3. And it's basically like discard anything in your first 2 turns, Rite of Harmony, and play a land and get 1 Bloodghast back. And if you dredge from there and hit a Narcomoeba or hit a second Bloodghast with your next one, you are off to the races. It's pretty laughably easy to get through your deck at that point.
Yeah, Beck does the same stuff though.
It does. Beck did the exact same trick.
This has flashback and is an instance you could do, I don't know, like upkeep stuff with Narcomoeba or whatever. But
yep. That was my biggest draw, is that you could also just like dredge and get to 4 mana and still go ahead. And it's probably more likely you have to have 5 mana, but you get to 5 mana and you can still do this. So kind of a slower game plan off the flashback plan. You don't actually have to draw it. And all that was appealing because you were still doing the setup. I had moved the mana base to be blue based. So Hedron Crab and the new looting, which we'll talk about in a little bit, as opposed to the usual things you see like Cathartic Reunion and Burning Inquiry.
Yeah, so, see, I was thinking Naya because you keep those cards and you still have Thrilling Discovery. But I could
Thrilling Discovery is good. Yeah, that's a good point. I will have to give that build a look as well. Well, so maybe this is 2 separate experiments, but the other thing I did in that spot was try to sideboard transition into the mill plan with just like going 8 Crabs, Luris, and Tasha's Hideous Laughter and Archive Trap. I don't know how realistic that is, but I just thought it was interesting that if you go towards blue, you can start to look at those type of plans. I was playing Consider as well, which I thought was pretty interesting in that shell.
Yeah, that card's nice. All right. Slogurk the Overslime. 1 GU, 3/3, legendary creature ooze, trample. Whenever a land card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on this. Remove 3 +1/+1 counters from this. Return it to its owner's hand. When this leaves the battlefield, return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. I think this card is good. I did a quick Scryfall search and mostly came up short as far as like ways to put lands into your graveyard. It's like we don't actually have that much self-mill, which was like kind of frustrating when trying to build decks.
Yeah, I just put this card on the list because I love it. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. I think in terms of raw power, it seems like it's there. Like if you could find the appropriate payoffs, you should be able to have a weird card advantage-y big threat that can protect itself. And that's very much something I'm interested in. It's in older formats, this has some appeal, but then you're playing with much better cards and it's harder to play a 3-mana 3/3. So some of the appeal slips in that scenario. But I just love this card, and I hope there's something we can do with it that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if you like ran in 7 and then you like loot away the excess lands and then you make this thing big. If they try and kill it, you get the lands back and like replay it, flashback the looting, make it big. I don't know. It seems like nonsense, right?
Slow, dirtily nonsense. Exactly my type of jam. That's what I'm here for.
All right. Dire Strain Rampage. 1 RG sorcery. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land. If a land was destroyed this way, its controller may search their library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. Otherwise, its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. Flashback 3 RG. So I don't know. This is like Assassin's Trophy for artifacts or enchantments, or it's a Harrow for you.
Yeah, and you sound skeptical, but let me tell you why I think this is actually meaningful. The fact that it flashbacks means it's creating your ramp to like 6 or 7 in and of itself with no other resource invested, just like I Dire Strain Rampage my thing, and then I do it again. And granted, you've done nothing across those 2 turns. You've invested a ton of mana. But in scenarios...
If you're goldfishing, it's fine, right?
If your only goal is to hit that mana threshold and play ultimatum, right? Something that is designed to win you the game on the spot. This card does it at a very low resource cost while also giving you some emergency outs to things which could be problematic for you. I think in scenarios too, where like you're forced into playing a 3-mana spell. So any kind of like Cascade deck, this could have some appeal if you eventually maybe want to cast a big spell, or you just want to make sure you destroy whatever your opponent has, and you always need to have an answer. You need to do it twice. Dire Strain Rampage could be okay in that spot too. If you're forced to go into the 3-mana realm. Granted, there's competition for that slot. I don't know this will always be the best answer, but I do like how many things it covers.
It's not bad. It's just like a very archetype specific card.
I think so. That's a good way of putting it.
And it's like a weird card, right? So it's like you have to, I don't know, get used to the idea that like this card exists because we've never seen anything like this before.
Yeah, it being at sorcery speed will do a lot to make it easier to live with in terms of like, oh, I got Dire Strain Rampage in a weird spot. I don't think that'll happen all that often. I don't even know that this will see that much play, but it's a unique card worth mentioning in my eyes.
Yes. Old Stickfingers, XBG, **, legendary creature horror. When you cast the spell, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal X creature cards. Put all creature cards revealed this way into your graveyard, then put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. This thing's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Solid Mortivore type of thing, I think.
You know what I want to do with this, though, right?
Like tutor for a specific creature. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah. I want to just find one creature and get it into my graveyard as quickly as possible and be able to go off. Now, that means you can only play one old Stickfingers in that scenario.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
I know. It's weird.
You could stick fingers into another Stickfingers, but that doesn't really do a whole lot.
It does not. It does not. But it's like a weird Entomb in formats that won't give you access to Entomb, and that feels like it might be exploitable in some spots. And at other spots, it's like you said, just a Mortivore. And again, sticking with that theme of things that scale decently well. I don't think this blows anyone away, but I do think you can find use for it if your deck is already graveyard based and you want something that scales into the late game.
Yeah, it's not bad, assuming your deck can do this well enough. But as I mentioned, not a whole lot of self-mill, surprisingly.
Right. What about scenarios where like the creatures in your deck are only creatures that benefit from entering the graveyard? So you have things like your Bloodghast, Gravecrawler, Vengevine type setups.
What format are we talking?
We're talking older formats, and
I'm not paying 3 mana for this thing in like my Vengevine deck, and in modern,
no, you probably can't get away with that. Okay, well, old Stickfingers looks like he's destined to the burn pile, and so be it.
Nah, I think that if more self-mill stuff gets printed, this thing is completely reasonable. But whatever.
Okay.
Can't stay away. Dub B sorcery, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains, if this creature would die, exile instead. Flashback 3 Dub B.
I just want to bring back 3 mana creatures. I don't think there's really much to say about Can't Stay Away. I think I have built some decks which are reliant upon my 3 mana creatures. I mentioned like my Runeforge champion deck. Can't Stay Away can do things there. I played it in my Elves deck. The biggest spot is alongside Lurrus, I think. A lot of decks want a way to rebuy Lurrus. If you're doing that reliably, then you're able to play these really long games. And I see this being a small addition to several decks, just like 1 or 2 copies, and mostly Lurrus decks that are looking to get an extra go around with Lurrus.
That's more so like historic, probably, right?
Yep. At this point, it has to be historic, right? Because we are done with Lurrus and Standard.
I was speaking to like historic versus modern or whatever.
Right. Yeah, modern has better ways to do this.
Modern has Unearth and stuff like that. But
yep.
As a value card, like if you have Butcher Cathar, Elite Spellbinder, you're playing like some, Orzhov Disruption aggro deck. It's like this thing's not that bad.
Yeah.
I don't know that you get to play with 4 copies again, unless you have some self-mill stuff, but whatever.
Maybe they're going to be real judicious with that self-mill stuff, because we have said that a few times now, how good many of these cards get if you have it.
Well, I think that's the point, It's like if you just did a bunch of Stitcher Supplier type of things, then all these cards would be kind of busted.
Yep.
Ghoulcaller's Harvest, BG sorcery, create X 2/2 black zombie creature tokens with Decayed, where X is half the number of creature cards in your graveyard rounded up. Flashback 3 BG.
Where's your self-mill at now?
No kidding, right?
This could go off hard in a lot of scenarios. This is also one that could reach back, in my opinion. I think the payoff is there in your Stitcher Supplier deck in Historic, if you put enough bodies onto the battlefield. What are you getting up to with this card right now?
This is what I wrote about this week. I think this card...
So you're into this.
Yeah, I think this card is awesome. Basically, I don't think it's that difficult for this to make 2 tokens in the early game. And going long, it just scales so well. Obviously, it would scale a lot better if we could mill ourselves, but we can't. But still, if you're doing like Village Rite stuff, Plumb the Forbidden stuff.
Oh, speaking my language now.
Yeah, I see scenarios where you fire off a Plumb, fill your graveyard, maybe you keep around a Prosperous Innkeeper or whatever, but you can just sack everything, draw like 4 cards, and then you just like harvest, plumb away those, and you just kind of go off from there, man.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is sort of the thing that we were missing when we were building those decks, because you would plumb, draw a bunch of cards, but you wouldn't have a battlefield presence. And this is just like, boom, battlefield presence, right? And I started with just like normal green-black stuff, and those decks look good. I also think that as far as self-mill stuff, Ren and 7 is like the card because it, casts mulch a bunch.
Yep.
So you can build a bigger version of that deck with like Asika's Chariot and Ren and 7, which is obviously like a pretty nice combo. And you have a bunch of tokens to copy with Asika's Chariot anyway. And a bunch of like Decayed Zombies accrue and stuff too, whatever.
Yep.
But if you want to set up combo kills, I don't think it's that hard to like, plumb, do this and then plumb, and then like do this, Witherbloom Apprentice and plumb, or you just have like 10 power and you just wait until next turn and attack them. And then I started looking at options for global haste. And there's First Day of Class, which if you're like strictly combo, it's not that bad. It's basically Shatterstorm, right? And the other one is Zavriel, which is like the D&D Planeswalker. It's just like 4 mana, 0 to make a devil, +1 to give all your stuff +1/+0 haste.
Yeah.
So I was like, just playing that as kind of like a value card. Like you're doing Village Rite stuff anyway, and making a bunch of devils isn't that bad.
Okay. You have sold me. I am interested in this idea. What kind of global graveyard hate is out there now? It has me interested into ways to check this.
I don't know. I didn't get that far. I didn't think about it too much. There's a Memory's Journey in green. That's pretty solid.
Yeah, I think that is on this list somewhere. I'm pretty sure.
Turn the Earth. Yep.
But I mean, like, where are we at? Soul Guide Lantern is rotating, correct?
Yep.
That was kind of the best thing we had in the present format. There's no KOs like Leyline of the Void or Rest in Peace out there. So maybe the graveyard's primed and ready to go.
And the other thing, when I was building like the Jund version of this deck with the haste stuff, was like, I could probably just play Moonveil Regent instead of the haste stuff and just have like a good deck. And as far as like things that can fill your graveyard, that thing does a hell of a good job.
Yes, it does. Great point. Yeah, you keep your CMCs very low besides that. And again, it seems like you could just go off.
So maybe you're making like a token or 2 tokens, but, you know, kind of later on, you're making like 4 or 5 tokens. And then you just have like these massive lava axes that are just kind of on layaway for a turn.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that that's very good. You know, it's just not a bad thing to have.
I'm into it.
Next card on the list is the Celestis, which we talked about.
Yep. I thought I didn't have that on the list. Okay,
Yeah.
We don't need to go back into that. I think it's pretty medium, but it's what we have for a mana rock right now.
And then we have Hostel. This is a land that taps for colorless, and you can pay 1 tap, sack a creature, and put a soul counter on this. Then if there are 3 or more soul counters on it, remove those counters, transform it, and untap it. Activate only as a sorcery. Backside is Creeping In. It's a 3/7. It's an artifact, I guess. Artifact creature, horror construct. Whenever this attacks, you may exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of creature cards exiled with Creeping In, and you can pay 4 to phase this thing out.
I think people might be high on the memory of Westvale Abbey now.
Westvale Abbey wasn't even that good.
I would say Westvale Abbey is 10 times better than this card.
Yes, I would say that too. So like
this is so slow, and then the payoff is just not that big.
If you're sacrificing creatures for value, or if you have like Jadar that's just making a token every turn and you have excess mana and having a colorless land doesn't like mess up your mana base, then like, okay, this is a thing that you can be doing. But like, I don't know, just trying to, you know, pigeonhole this into your deck and sacrifice reasonable creatures to it to transform it. And, oh yeah, I just noticed that. That's heinous. Okay. It's such a slow clock. It's big. Like 7 toughness is a lot, and you can protect it against sweepers or whatever. But yeah, the sorcery speed is definitely not good. It's not like, oh, you know, you kill my thing, I sack a response. Whatever. So I don't know, man. I think this card stinks. I put this in my Ghoulcaller's Harvest decks, but I also wrote like, I think this thing kind of sucks, but I think that people would expect it to be here because it's like a sacrifice deck.
So it's just there so you don't get yelled at, basically.
Yes. Just covering my ass, man.
Yeah, I think I am going to call this card bad. I feel comfortable doing that.
It's a mythic rare.
I know. And I think that's what's giving people hope. And it is what's giving me pause too when I say it's bad, because somewhere the experience must have been, oh, this card is extremely strong. It's got to be a mythic rare. Or maybe they just thought the pun was that worthy of mythicness. Like the hostile has to be a mythic. But I don't know. This card's not doing it for me.
I don't like it.
Okay.
I think we're into uncommon land now.
Really? That's it for our rares? Okay.
I think so. We'll see. Sacred Fire. R-dub instant. This deals 2 damage to any target and you gain 2 life. Flashback for R-dub.
Feels like a very Gerry card. You were in love with Smiting Helix. This is sort of reverse Smiting Helix.
I was in love with Smiting Helix because you could loot it away. And this is the reverse. This is like you have to cast it and then maybe 13 turns down the line, you flash it back, you know? I wanted to loot and get a free Lightning Helix. That was all.
Yeah, this is not doing that. But like, I don't know. What do you think of smaller Lightning Helix in the standard context? Is that still a good card? Is that still a playable card?
If you are playing against creature decks that have ways to kind of like burn you out, either, you know, like they have haste things or blood artist things or just burn spells, whatever.
Yep.
Having this sort of effect is always good. And then obviously, like, you're going to get to situations where like you get to flash this back and you feel like the game is over because you're kind of out of range. So that's nice, but the 2 damage has to matter, and those matchups have to matter.
Maybe sideboard play for this card.
Possibly. But there's also like a 2 mana timely reinforcements, which is just busted. So.
Oh, we'll get to that. Don't worry. I knew you'd want to talk about that one. So,
Rootcoil Creeper, GU22 creature plant horror. Tap, add 1 mana of any color. Tap, add 2 mana of any one color. Spend this mana to only cast spells from your graveyard. UG, tap, exile this, return target card with flashback you own from exile to your hand.
All right. See, this is why I hesitated when you said we were through the rares, because I knew there was a rare I wanted to talk about, and this card has brought it back to me. This was for my Teferi deck. I got excited when I saw this card because, like I said, I want to plus Teferi and get a bunch of mana from creatures, artifacts, and lands. I also happen to have a card I want to play from my graveyard in my Teferi deck, which we very erroneously skipped, Gerald, and I'm going to bring us back around to it.
Did we? Did I blow
Memory
it?
Memory Deluge. And I think I blew it. I think I left it off my list. And I have it. It's further down.
Yeah, it's under. You said this was sorted by rarity. So
I tried.
Once we got to the uncommons, I was like, all right, we're just done.
No, I just messed up Sacred Fire. There's more rares coming. So we would have gotten to this eventually. I'm skipping forward now, though, because I've already brought it up. Memory Deluge, 2 colorless, UU, instant. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast the spell. Put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So basically we're starting off with a 4 mana, look at the top 4, put 2 in your hand. I think that's good enough. But this also has flashback, 5 colorless UU. And now we're looking at the top 7 and putting 2 into our hand. All of this at instant speed. I think this card is over the moon good for constructed decks. I'm actively excited to play this card, play it in my control decks, and do old dig through time-ish feeling stuff. I've hated so many of the 4 mana draw 2s that we've been forced to play over the years, but I really think this one is good. And now I can bring that around to our friend that we started the conversation with, our Rootcoil Creeper, because I would like to tap this twice with my Teferi and go ahead and fire this out of my graveyard.
Yeah, this card is nice. I mean, this is just way better than like a Scry 2 draw 2, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So and just like has flashback, which is super generous. This card's nice.
I think it's great. I think it's a huge tool for control decks. And, the Teferi deck is, I would say it's a meme at this point. It's an idea I want to explore. That's not really what I'm here for. But I do think Rootcoil Creeper as a 2 mana dork that also brings a 2/2 body with it and really sort of goes off into more powerful spells and has the potential to buy it back. Like, you get to buy back your Memory Deluge with Rootcoil Creeper. You're so far ahead in that game. You're just getting value for days.
I think once you cast it and flash it back, you should be good.
Should be good, but I mean, who knows what the context of standard is? So certainly it's possible for decks to come back over the top of the haymakers, and I don't know that we have like the one-hit KOs that have defined standard for a long period of time, so I could see some longer games potentially happening. In those scenarios, I think Rootcoil Creeper's ability could absolutely matter, but we're mostly here for the mana, I think.
Yeah, mostly. And we also don't have a lot of options for a 2 mana creature.
Right.
And this having like multiple different upsides, obviously it's like kind of hard to cast, and it's enemy colored too, so we don't have the actual dual land. You'd have to like play Snarls or whatever. I'm not trying to do that. So it's a little bit tough, but I think you just do what you got to do,
Yeah, I think it's going to be worth the effort in a lot of spots.
Okay, so here's another rare. I guess, yeah, you just dipped into the uncommons for a couple of
I guess I was really excited to talk about Sacred Fire. I don't know what's going on there.
And do you like the card? Do you think it's good?
Not really.
What the hell? Okay, what are we doing here?
I don't know.
You put down Fateful Mending. Do you mean Fateful Absence? Is Fateful Mending even a card?
Faithful Mending's a card. Wait, what's Fateful Absence?
Oh, wait. Faithful Mending or Fateful Absence. Okay. Fateful Absence is not on your list, I think. No, it is. It is. It's just below. I'm gonna move this up, and we're just gonna talk about it now because we already mentioned it.
Okay. Really well-defined list this week.
Fateful Absence, 1 dub instant, destroy target creature or planeswalker its controller investigates.
This is the new card that just got spoiled right before we started recording, right? That's why that's in a weird place. I'm going to make an excuse so I don't get yelled at. Just good, clean removal, instant speed, which I think plays very well with some of the other instants floating around. The cost is real, but it's diverse enough that I think I'm willing to pay it. It sort of depends how good Planeswalkers are. I think Red and 7's excellent. Beyond that, I don't know. I mean, I mentioned that like the Elf Planeswalker has some appeal. It's possible Teferi is decent. So maybe Planeswalkers are better than we think right now. We haven't really been dealing with many Planeswalkers, but if they do become a problem, you'll happily trade a clue token for the presence of any Planeswalkers. So
Red and 7 is good.
Yeah.
So
I think this will be an important removal spell.
How much worse is this than Declaration Instant? I don't even think it is. I think it's better.
Instant speed is a big deal.
It is.
Very big deal for these type of decks.
So Deck and Stone had like the exile clause and it hit multiple things. Sometimes that mattered, sometimes it didn't for both of them, right? And if you're just going to say like, well, that's corner case stuff, it's kind of a blowout when it does happen for like tempo reasons. But this being an instant and also hitting Planeswalkers, it just seems much better to me. Obviously, like, context of the formats are different and everything. I think that this is probably higher powered than those formats were, but I don't know.
Probably.
Card seems quite good.
I'm with you. I'm happy this exists.
Okay, so back into gold uncommons, I guess. Faithful Mending. I remembered what this card was. You dub instant. You gain 2 life, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. Flashback 1 you dub. So
this kind of sort of is self-mill by a very loose definition.
It is, man. And I stretched. I tried to stretch. I don't think it's that hard to play like 4 colors if you wanted to. You have all the pathways and dual lands and stuff. But
well, that's good news.
It can't be awkward to try and play this and like Ghoulcaller's Harvest probably. And once you're playing a bunch of like spells, then you have fewer creatures to put in your graveyard.
Right.
Anyway. So
of course. But still, like as a card in just a vacuum, this is a powerful effect. It is as close as we're going to get to pure faithless looting in a lot of spots, I think, which is why I was interested in exploring it in a dredge style deck and why I thought it might be worth redefining your mana base to see what Faithful Mending could provide you. Very consistent draw 2, discard 2 on multiple turns, which I'm happy to see. If you find a way to fill your 1 mana spot, which I was doing with, like I said, Ruin Crab's Consider, it could be a new foundation for a dredge deck. I'm not saying it has to be like the Glimpse of Nature style dredge deck. It could just be traditional dredge deck that wants to move towards blue and then get some other sideboard options. That seems fine too.
This card is quite good. It's weird because Faithless Looting always had things that were kind of like in color where it was like, oh yeah, obviously I want to play this with like these other red cards.
Mm-hmm.
And Faithful Mending is more about like, okay, what blue and white things do we want to be doing alongside this?
Yeah. And traditionally the answer is like, not much from the graveyard. That's not really blue and white's jam. So this card feels strange, somewhat. Like I wouldn't say it feels out of place. I think it's doing things that like these colors traditionally do. It's just these roles have been filled by other colors and constructed for so long now.
Right. So I don't know what we do with this. I think this card is good. Obviously, I mean, instant speed is fine. The extra life is fine. It's not 1 mana, so it's not as efficient as the other thing, right? Which
it is not.
Just means that this is maybe going to be like a fixed version of that, which is something you should be excited about. We just have to figure out what to do with it.
There's also a lot of room for Faithless Looting to be fixed and still be very good. So
yeah, I mean, Faithless Salvaging is completely fine.
Yep.
So I'm bouncing all over the place now. Now I'm trying to find Kessig Naturalist.
This is another gold uncommon right after Faithful Mending.
Oh my god! It sounded like just a mono green card to me. But okay, I wrote about this card. RG22, creature human werewolf. Whenever this thing attacks, add R or G until end of turn. You don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. It has Daybound. It also has a backside that is a 3/3. Other wolves and werewolves you control get +1/+1. Whenever this attacks, add R or G until end of turn. You don't lose this mana as steps and phases end and Nightbound. So it's a fine 2 mana werewolf. It's
yep.
kind of a mana creature. It's a lord on the backside. Fills your deck. It's good.
I think it's interesting as a redundant form of 2 mana creature that can attack and also create some mana. And we have that already with what's the stupid thing that Magda? Maga? No, that's not it.
Not Maga, Brian.
No,
is
not that.
Magda Brazen Outlaw.
That's the one I was thinking of.
And it like doesn't
Maga is, of course, traitor to mortals. I should have known that.
Yes, clearly. Magda really doesn't do a whole lot of attacking, honestly. Right? It's
usually in conjunction with Jaspera Sentinel, but I think in like Gruul's and the Chariot, but in Gruul's most explosive draws, it usually gets him for 2 in that spot. So
yeah, I don't know. If this thing does get to attack, cool. Mostly, it's just like 2/2 body is not that impressive. You're really going to want to be able to transform your stuff consistently to get this to do anything.
Yeah, another payoff for your Wolf Tribal.
Sneak into Festival.
Green rare. All right, we're back to rares now. Maybe staying in rares for a while.
Dude, I don't know. You tell me.
I don't know at this point.
This card is dope though. 3 GGG sorcery. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. Put up to 2 permanent cards with mana value 5 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Flashback 7 GGG. So you don't like Collected Company. This is 1 fewer card, but like the amount of hits that you have, how are
almost
you ever
impossible to miss?
How are you going to miss on this?
I'm going to find a way. I promise you that. But this is very cool. Again, it feels like a fixed version of a powerful card, but this seems to snowball in the right ways. And I don't know exactly what I'm doing with this yet, but for whatever reason, I just went to the idea of like if this existed alongside Cavalier of Thorns, and I started thinking about like that snowball setup.
Brian, Ren 7 is better. Okay, it's better than Cavalier of Thorns.
That's a fine approach as well. We can go ahead and
Ren actually gets you to 10 mana to flash this thing back, and you can hit like Ren and Chariot and like make the token copy the token.
Yeah, that's a big game right there.
Right?
You might have just put me over the top with that one combination.
Okay, so other card I want to talk about, because I was actually building decks like this where it was like mono green kind of value, and then it was like, maybe I'll look for a second color to splash if I need to.
Mm-hmm.
Augur of Autumn,
yep.
1 GG, 2/3 creature human druid. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may play lands from the top of your library. Coven, as long as you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. So if you have Coven active with this, you get to play creatures and lands from the top of your library. There's things like Druid class that let you hit extra land drops. And now we're talking about like this 6 mana Collected Company, Ren, and the Chariot, which are things you can't play with this. But like, regardless, you're going to be able to like, get card advantage off the top of your deck. That leads you to having enough resources to get to like the Chariot and Ren 7. Mm-hmm. And then sneak into Festival was like, oh, this is like the perfect top end for a deck like this.
Sounds really cool. I think there has to be some more interaction. I'm not sure you're going to be able to just like snowball enough just churning these out, even with like the huge mana explosion from Ren and 7. It just feels like something's missing to me right now.
Just decisive denial. What else do you need? It fixes all your problems. You have like a Werewolf Pack Leader as a brick wall and a thing for Coven and potentially a source of card advantage. Like you basically just play like the good green stuff as threats, but card advantage.
Yeah, it sounds promising. Certainly one of the first things I will be exploring come Ren and 7 crafting time. The mono green approach seems like it has some legs.
Find a splash for sure, but
yep.
But all of this seems to really be coming together where you just have like this awesome pile of green value stuff, Oh, guess
too much green value stuff.
Maybe they're doing different things, Yeah. So it's like maybe you have a green value deck that goes bigger with like Ren and stuff. Maybe you play Augur of Autumn in kind of like mono green aggro or whatever without a huge top end. Maybe these are like multicolored cards,
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's cool that it's not all just like, well, Growth Spiral leads into Nissa and that leads into Krasis, and like this is what all the decks are doing, right? Like I think you are still going to see variety.
Cool.
But yeah, this stuff is all pretty exciting to me. I like it. Willow Geist, what the hell is that?
I don't even remember at this point. I gotta find that one.
Damn it.
Willow Geist. What does it sound like? It sounds like a spirit.
It is a spirit. It's going to be white or blue. I guess Willow is more white than blue.
I don't think it's a real card.
This is why we still read off like what the cards do because
we don't know.
We don't know. If this is a gold uncommon, I'm going to lose my shit.
It doesn't appear to be, but I also can't find it. It may not be real.
You just making up cards, man?
It's in my range.
Like Willow is black, but like Geist is not really a black thing.
The best part is that all of our listeners definitely know this card, and they're just screaming, "Idiots! Absolute idiots! How do you not know what this is?"
Best card in the set.
All right. Well, we're gonna go to the Google and see if that will.
It's gonna be one of the foreign cards, right? Because we're on Mythic Spoiler.
Oh, I love this card. How did I not know what this was? It's a green card, by the way.
What? Willow as in tree, not like dead thing?
A willow as in tree. This is a 1G creature, tree folk spirit, trample. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Willow Geist. When Willow Geist dies, you gain life equal to its power. I mean, I think this card is like modern playable power levels. This seems absolutely pushed to me, and just going to get huge for a 1-mana creature in a lot of scenarios. The most obvious one alongside Delve, but there's a lot of ways to do this trick and just make this stupid big for a 1-mana card.
Like Delve is tough, right? Because this is one or more, you get a counter. So like you have to do it multiple times.
Okay. Well, let me tell you, I misread this card. Okay. So I've already changed my opinion.
Yeah, it's not Murktide Regent. It's more like Wild Nacatl.
Okay, I still think it's good. I have come down a little bit from my initial assessment.
So this and like Scavenging Ooze would be a good combo.
Yes,
right?
that is nice. If you're working over your own graveyard, that would be fine. Anything flashing back, this gets bigger.
Yep.
So any kind of cheap flashback activity, any kind of creature graveyard shenanigans like Bloodgeisty type stuff, that's pretty appealing. So certainly enough ways to go ahead and trigger this one without the huge burst of counters that I was envisioning with Delve. And there was another green card that I thought would be quite good in conjunction with this that we may as well talk about now while we're here. This isn't uncommon, so I'm going to move us down the list a little bit. Like we're really holding on to that list much at this point anyway.
I'm just confused as to like how you actually made this list.
Don't try and understand how my mind works. It's just complete nonsense and anything could happen. Also, I think this card was in the wrong spot on the preview sheet. It is. This is Deathbonnet Sprout, which I would like to talk about now. This is another 1G creature, fungus. At the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card. Then if there are 3 or more creature cards in your graveyard, transform Deathbonnet Sprout. And on the backside, we're looking at Deathbonnet Hulk. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile a card from any graveyard. If a creature card was exiled this way, put a +1/+1 counter on Deathbonnet Hulk. So again,
it's a 3/3.
1-mana green creature. It is a 3/3, 1-mana green creature that has potential to just be tremendous. And these two cards working in conjunction with each other, they sort of do their thing. I mean, I think you need some kind of other enabler going on here, but there's a lot of potential between these two cards.
So this was previewed after I submitted my article. So this is technically a self-mill card at the beginning of your upkeep. You mill a card. And I was already looking at like Egon, God of Death, where it's like, oh, maybe I just play this thing. I don't know. But yeah, this card is definitely not bad either. If you're playing more of like a mono green aggro deck, I think that this and Willow Geist could fit pretty well together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting little package of 1-mana creatures that, you expect to be small for some period of time, but when they get big, they get really big.
All right, what about Suspicious Stowaway?
That is a blue card. I know that, and I believe it's a rare. So we're somehow back to the rares.
All right. 1/1, 1/1, creature, human, rogue, werewolf. This can't be blocked. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, then discard a card. And it also has Daybound and a backside. The backside is green. It's a 2/1 werewolf. It can't be blocked. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, and has Nightbound. So you have like this crappy looter ill core that eventually transforms into an unblockable Ophidian.
That doing anything for you?
No, not in this little 1/1 into a 2/1. No.
Size doesn't always matter, Gerald. And there are scenarios where if you're playing...
That's the opposite of what I've been told my entire life.
I don't even know what to do with that. But in scenarios where you just want to have a steady source of card advantage on the battlefield, I played some stupid card from the Dungeons and Dragons set that was like doing the same type of stuff, but instead it was just murking around a dungeon a little bit. And this seems like a far better version of that same effect, where you're able to just consistently get your loots and then turn into a draw on the flip side while you just play at instant speed because you want to go ahead and trigger to Nightbound anyway and get some card advantage going. I don't hate this card. I don't really have an immediate home for it, but I could see potential.
The thing that I will say about this card is that it is a blue werewolf that works with the other werewolves. And there are things like Brutal Cathar and like Dawnbreak, Gavany, something or other. It's like a militia bugler type of thing. Whatever. It doesn't matter. I like the idea that werewolves might not just be an archetype that is Gruul. Or it might be like a 3-color archetype or something. Like Suspicious Stowaway as a werewolf sort of enabler with things like Decisive Denial just being like a Simic deck. I think that is cool. So I don't want to play this card necessarily just like based on rate or whatever, but maybe there are enough like werewolf synergy type of things where, maybe you want to be Simic werewolves. I don't know.
Okay. As long as you're not discounting it, I can live with your assessment.
I would put it on like, so like, did you ever have conversations with like Wizards people about like full card, half card, quarter card type of stuff?
I am familiar.
This is like a quarter card to me.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah, I'm on board with that. Quarter card.
So full card is you would be surprised if it doesn't see play. Half card is you would not be surprised if it sees play, and then quarter card is like half of that, right? So It's like I guess I wouldn't be shocked if this showed up, but like I'm not banking on it. It's just like kind of a card with some appealing text, and like maybe it shows up.
Probably needs a good scenario to find a home.
Yeah. So like any of the like 5 mana things that we talked about, it's kind of like on par with those. You know, it's like if the situation, if the conditions are correct, then maybe whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Same with this card, I guess. Slaughter Specialist, 1B, 3/3, creature vampire warrior. When this enters the battlefield, each opponent creates a 1/1 white human creature token. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on this. I guess this is better than I think it is. I don't know.
I could see this getting out of hand in some scenarios. Certainly, like any deck which relies on damage to answer it is going to have a pretty small window to go ahead and get out in front of it. I don't know, like 3/3 for 2 with downside. Does that really track? If there's a lot of like 2 damage removal, certainly it pushes a little bit further in this favor. Of course, Vampire Tribal as well. So if that's a real deck and wants to do things sort of on the more aggressive side of the spectrum and isn't just playing a bunch of X1s, which the next card we're going to talk about kind of points to, maybe it does want to play X1s, then you can think about it. But your deck needs to build around this. If it does, power level might be there.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to play like Usher of the Fallen or whatever into this thing, right? Like
that would be bad.
As long as the best thing that their thing does is like chump block and then grow your creature, then you're good. But it's also weirder when you're playing against another creature deck, which is where you want this card, and then their 1/1 allows them to like double up with their 2 power thing to kill this or whatever. So yeah, there are like weird scenarios, but like as far as downsides are concerned, giving your opponent a 1/1, which can also turn into a benefit because it dies and grows your thing, is not the worst. So maybe I'm a little hasty about this. This card is maybe like a half card, I guess.
Okay.
So I think you were gonna go to like Falkenrath Pit Fighter.
May as well talk about it, yeah, since that is the vampire card I would be concerned about playing alongside Slaughter Specialists.
R2/1, creature vampire warrior, 1R, discard a card, sacrifice a vampire, draw 2 cards, activate only if an opponent lost life this turn. This is like vampires are getting weird.
That is weird, but I think it's good. I think it's quite strong, again, for a red aggressive deck that's trying to stay low to the ground. It doesn't even have to be vampires. It could be something that's, trying to get to Moonveil Regent or something like that. And you still can always sack itself to this ability. So if the body gets invalidated, you get a little deeper into your deck. I think that's acceptable. Only if an opponent lost life. That's a little iffy, because if you get to those end states where you're like really in desperate need of getting deeper into your deck,
it's harder to actually deal them damage.
Yeah. So, but your baseline is like, I got a 2/1 for 1 mana. In a lot of spots, that's going to be A-okay, especially if there's something to do with Vampire Tribal. So I do think this card has potential.
Like, sack a Vampire to draw 2, even if you're discarding a card, it's probably like, stupid land you don't need,
a land
or whatever, right?
Yeah, so that's the assumption.
Yeah, I'm not looking at the discard a card as too much of a downside, but like draw 2 cards is a lot, especially like you could just have a turn where you're churning through your deck looking for whatever it is you need.
Yeah,
and maybe
looking for a burn spell.
Yeah, maybe this set doesn't have sacrificial fodder, but I'm thinking of like Dusk Legion Zealot and like going back to historic maybe, or Legion's Landing type of stuff, right?
Yeah.
I could see that being like pretty reasonable. So I don't know, maybe, and then maybe you have other ways to just drain them, right? That don't involve combat in case the ground gets locked up and then you have this thing.
So like what Vicious Conquistador type effects or something like that, where you're just pinging them no matter what.
Yeah, or Meathook Massacre, I guess, although that's not.
Sure.
I don't think that's really a vampire card.
Okay.
Yeah, either way, we have a Jackal Pup. It does some stuff. It's cool.
Good enough.
Reckless Stormseeker, 2R, 2/3, human werewolf. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. Also has Daybound. And a backside that's a 3/4. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +2/+0 and trample and haste until end of turn as Nightbound. So this is like your Fires of Yavimaya kind of thing for your werewolf deck.
Yeah, I think like the baseline of this just being a 3/3 haste for 3 mana is, again, entirely acceptable. If you get to just go ahead and deploy it into Nightbound and drop a 5/4 trample haste on turn 3, then you're way ahead of the game. And this will obviously be super punishing to any starts your opponent has, where they are unable to cast a spell and you've already made it daybound through an earlier werewolf. So I think this is probably a big part of the werewolf deck, if I had to guess.
Yeah, when I was building decks, you had Tovolar as a 3-drop and then not a whole lot else that I really wanted. And this fills the deck pretty nicely.
I think so.
And it also just like gives you more haste stuff alongside the Nightbound side of Arlen. So that's pretty cool too.
Yeah.
Briar Bridge Tracker, 2G, 2/3, creature human scout, vigilance. When this enters the battlefield, investigate. As long as you control a token, this gets +2/+0. So, 3 mana, 4/3, a clue that just hangs around for however long you want it, has vigilance. This is okay. It's definitely not Tireless Tracker, right?
Times have gotten tough for Tireless Tracker.
But as a card in like mono green aggro type of stuff, like maybe you're not trying to do Augur of Autumn, like go super long, but you want a little beater that gives you a little bit of card advantage. I think this is solid.
I'm with you. Solid card. Don't think you need to go out of your way to build around it, but we'll find homes.
Curse of Silence. Dub, enchantment, aura, curse, enchant player. As this enters the battlefield, choose a card name. Spells with the chosen card name enchanted player cast cost 2 more to cast. Whenever enchanted player casts a spell with the chosen name, you may sacrifice this. If you do, draw a card. So obviously not legal anymore, but you name whatever ultimatum, right? They have to pay 9 for it, and then you can just cycle this away. You're probably still losing the ultimatum in that case, but
yes. Yeah, I looked at this as very much a way to buy time against Wraths and a way to do so at a very mana efficient point. Maybe it was just because I was building a bunch of Rite of Harmony decks, but this made its way into way more of my deck list than I would have expected upon reading the text.
I guess it's an enchantment for your Rite of Harmony, but I still don't like it. Like the thing with the ultimatums and the thing with the sweepers is that like they cast it, okay. This slowed them down. You get to cycle this, but like the Wrath is still probably beating you, which is what I don't like.
It depends. I think like the fact that this is so mana efficient means you can still advance your battlefield to the point where you're pressuring them enough. And then I think getting the card advantage return on this means it didn't cost you a card, so you're able to rebuild more effectively. I will tell you, I would have been lower on this card had we not just come off the standard we came from, and like Elite Spellbinder being so important, and just any kind of cost increasing effect really being the only way for aggressive decks to keep up with the one card KOs that were so prevalent. Now, I would expect there'll be less of those in this new format. I am hoping there are far less of those in this format. So Curse of Silence's role should be far more niche, but I think this is an interesting card. And again, if you go back maybe a year ago and this card gets previewed, I probably don't give it a second look because it's the type of card that I think we expect to be bad. But I think this might surprise us and see just a little bit of play.
It's not terrible. The things that I worry about are that, like, you name their Wrath or whatever, and then they just beat you with their other stuff, and you're down a card. Or it's like, okay, this slowed them down, they cast their Wrath, and you still lose because they cast their Wrath. You know, it doesn't like stop it entirely, and in the meantime, it's just doing nothing. So it's going to be really difficult to evaluate the effect that it has on the game, especially
That's fair.
Especially when, if you're playing on ladder, for example, right? Like, you're never going to know if they had the thing or not.
Yep. No, it's very true. Definitely a problem with evaluating cards like this. Maybe it's just like a niche player where just the fact that I was building these Rite of Harmony decks pointed it in my direction so many times. But I would be remiss not to mention it given how many decks I put it in, because I would have expected it to be 0. And it came up way more than I thought.
Word. Fading Hope. You instant return target creature to its owner's hand. If its mana value is 3 or less, scry 1.
Wow.
Dope.
RIP Unsummon. I have spent a lot of time with Unsummon. We enjoyed all of our time together. I will miss it. I probably played it in a bunch of decks where I shouldn't have. I just loved it so much. But now we have Strictly Better, Fading Hope, and this card is great. It's going to see play. It's going to be awesome. I love it. I'm happy I get this.
It's not Strictly Better, Brian. What if they have a card that says whenever a player scries, they take a damage?
Oh, God. I can't have this conversation.
I'm just saying. Do words mean things or don't they?
When that card exists, we can go back and revisit Fading Hope being Strictly Better.
I don't know. There might be a card like that already. I have no idea.
Some commander set. It's possible.
I don't know every single card that exists.
Do you think you did at one point? Because I feel like I did at one point.
I definitely had blind spots for like really, really bad cards.
Okay.
There was like the Sorrow's Path type of stuff that I knew because they were like memes, right? Like people did talk about them, but there's like the middle of the road, like, oh, this is a 6 mana 2/2.
Legends commons,
yeah, 6 mana 2/2 with downside. And you're like, oh, okay, why would anyone ever talk about this, right? It's just a thing that exists. But I think it was like 80 or 90%, and now I'm just like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's probably more realistic. I think there was a point where I was probably like high 90%, and now it's got to be way lower than that.
There's just too many.
Yes, there are.
Cathartic Pyre, 1R, instant, choose 1. This deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, or discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. Why?
Meh. Why not?
Why?
You'll find a home for this. I mean, I don't think it's great
saying,
or anything.
Why does it have the second part? When has a card like this ever had a second part?
Oh, well, it does now.
It's dope.
I mean, do you want to go as far as, are you interested in this in Phoenix? Do you want to go back to Historic, or you just think this is a good option to have for Standard?
I don't know. I mean, for Standard, it depends on if you have any way to utilize this, the second part of it, or
it's mill. This is the new mill.
I get it. But like there's also things like Dragon's Fire where, you know, like does 3 damage matter? Does like 4 damage matter? Pairing it with a dragon.
Yep.
Are there going to be matchups that don't have any creatures or planeswalkers? So you want a thing that cycles even if it's really, really bad? You know, like this card seems very, very strong, right? Because it's just never dead, and you can just get up to no good with it. So I don't know. I'm just kind of like shocked that it's so generous. That's all.
You know, I love modality. I'm happy for more modality in sets. I don't have an immediate home in standard, and I don't think it goes back to historic Phoenix because you're so pushed to play 1 mana cards, and you're going to get more 1 mana cards with this set. But still happy it exists.
Yeah. Ambitious Farmhand. What the hell is this?
This is a white uncommon, and I feel like this is right up your alley. It's not good, but it is right up your alley.
Is that what you think of me, Brian? You're just like, oh, this is a terrible card. Gerry will love this.
Let me read the card to you.
I got it.
Tell me if I'm wrong.
It.
Okay, go ahead.
1 dub, so 2 mana total, 1/1, creature, human, peasant. When this enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Coven, 1 dub, transform this. Activate only if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers. Backside is a 3/3 with lifelink. In like a mid-rangey white deck, sure.
Replaces itself, maybe gets to be an effective body as the game goes on. Usually these are just throwaway spots where we go ahead and play our, Civic Wayfinder. This is such a boomer card because all of us old ones, we love the Civic Wayfinders. We always want to be able to play them. And Ambitious Farmhand is like a pretty good version of a Civic Wayfinder. Granted, it's only in white, but if there is a mid-range white deck that always wants to hit its land drops and scales to something different in the late game.
I mean, we're talking about 26 land white beatdown decks or whatever, right? Like this kind of fits.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not over the moon about it, but I could see a potential home for it. And it's the type of card I do really like playing.
It's also sacrifice fodder if you care about that.
True. At card neutral.
Sunset Revelry. What is that? Oh, white card. Found it. Oh,
this is your card. This is your invitational card.
1 dub, sorcery. If an opponent has more life than you, you gain 4 life. If an opponent controls more creatures than you, create 2 1/1 white human creature tokens. If an opponent has more cards in hand than you, draw a card. Busted.
Go off, and this is your moment.
I don't know. Timely Reinforcements was just like comically busted, right? Because they're like, Goblin Guide, attack you to like 16, and then you're like, Timely Reinforcements, go above 20, also have a bunch of things to block your 2/2, and you can triple block, so even if they try and like, Searing Blaze you to like blow you out in your double block, it was just so absurd. It gave you so much, and this is a 2 mana version, which is cool. I'm not sure how often you'll get to actually draw a card with this, but it's nice to have. I think that if both were legal, I would play Timely over this, depending on like mana curve considerations. But I don't know. This card is still very, very good. I also don't think that their decks are like Goblin Guide, Stagger Shock, Lightning Bolt type of stuff anymore. So, if your opponent is playing a bunch of 2/1s and is trying to burn you out, trying to nickel and dime you, then this card is excellent. But unfortunately, I'm not sure how much play this will see.
That's where I'm at as well. I think the 1/1s need to matter for this card to be good. And I think it's very easy to get sort of over the moon because this is Timely Reinforcements, but you get to draw a card. I don't think you're going to draw a lot of cards with this. It's just not going to happen all that often. And if you are drawing a card with this, things have gone wrong probably. And it's going to be really hard for you to claw out of that position.
I mean, it's nice though, I guess, if you're in that situation, right, where you're like getting kind of beaten down.
Yeah, it gets to cycle a little bit. Maybe draw some cards. That's fine.
It's a good way to get you back into it, or at least it's a start rather than just losing. But.
Right. It's a catch up mechanic. I do think this card is very powerful. I think Timely Reinforcements is mostly a far better card, and I wouldn't get too caught up in the draw card or the cost reduction, because with a card like this, it's all about the swing you create. This is going to create a smaller swing, but still an important swing, and do a great job. If there is a super aggressive deck, this should throw a wrench into their plans pretty effectively.
I like that it exists. I will say that.
Agreed.
Turn the Earth is a G instant. Choose up to 3 target cards in graveyards. The owners of those cards shuffle them into their libraries. You gain 2 life. Flashback 1G. Again, pretty damn generous.
You know what I want to do with this, right?
No clipping mode?
Don't know what that means, but I want to target my own stuff repeatedly and
so
just pass turn 3 Earth through my deck and make the most efficient version of my deck possible.
So you remember the Time Spiral block teachings deck that had Gaia's Blessing?
Yeah.
So I think it was Dan Skinner that relayed that term to me, where, you know, basically like you drew a bunch of cards, you careful consideration and like teachings for careful consideration, you Gaia's Blessing to shuffle back in your like tendrils of corruption, with teachings for that, gain a bunch of life, and you didn't want to play like win conditions because they're clunky against beatdown and were just like very easily answered by like temporal isolation, right?
Right. Hate win conditions.
Yeah, so win conditions just stunk. So instead, we would just try and draw cards, kill things, gain life, and then Gaia's Blessing to bore them to death. And he called it like when you're in that mode of just like, oh, Gaia's Blessing my stuff back in and like flashback teachings, like you're in no clipping mode, because that was the mode in Doom that allowed you to walk through walls. You just like became invincible.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'm definitely using that now. Yes, no clipping mode is what I'm here for with Turn the Earth.
Yeah.
I think it's like a good graveyard hate spell as well. But if I get to do no clipping mode stuff, I will be very excited.
It's Nexus of Fate, right?
Yep.
And
exactly.
Nexus just made it too easy. That was all those decks did, was just like, oh, I'll survive and then like mill my deck and just take all the turns, kill you incidentally, right? And yeah, this sets it up. I mean, you can either do it kind of like the fair way, where it's limited, like you just have one copy of this, or you can have 2 copies of this and just like target each other. So it's worse than Gaia's Blessing, because Gaia's Blessing cycled, so it wasn't like super dead early. But like the second, I guess like third iteration of Oath of Druids decks, once Gaia's Blessing rotated, played like a Memory's Journey to go with their Cognivores, so they could like oath away their graveyard, make Cognivore big, and then still not die, and like hopefully kill their opponent over 2 turns, right? So you can have a setup like that.
Love it. That's definitely what I'm here for. I hope it's not viable, because everyone will hate me and I'll ruin the ladder, and that's not what I want to do. I want everyone to enjoy this beautiful new set, and but I'm going to spend a lot of time on this for sure.
Delver of Secrets, not going to read it. I think it's bad.
I think history has shown it to be bad in a lot of scenarios. I sort of think the setup is here for this card this time.
I looked. I couldn't find any. Like the blue cards are unbelievably bad. There's Ascendant Spirit and nothing.
What about the Izzet cards?
I will admit that I did not look at the Izzet cards, but that's also because I couldn't think of anything really off the top of my head I wanted to play except for like iteration.
Yes, expressive iteration. Here's how I envision this deck. Basically, 4 Delver, 4 Thermo Alchemist, which we'll just that's coming. That's on our list.
That's the next card. Also a reprint. I will probably read that because a lot of people are probably like, what the hell is that?
I'll do it now for you. 1 colorless, 1 red, Defender, 03, Thermo Alchemist deals 1 tap. Thermo Alchemist deals 1 damage to each opponent. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, untap Thermo Alchemist. So I would like to do Delver of Secrets, Thermo Alchemist, 4 ofs.
Hate it.
Like two of not Purifying, the other actual good dragon. 2 of Moonveil Regent at the top end. We'll do unsummons, we'll do shocks, we'll do expressive iterations, probably do some counter magic, and we're off to the races, and nobody's ever going to beat us, and life is good.
You're definitely not off to the races, although
off to the races.
One thing I will say is that like if you really don't care about, you know, your mana entering tapped or taking a bunch of damage, you can play as many like DFCs to transform this thing as you want to. And
true. That
was one of the issues in Modern when people would try and build Delver decks, was that like the cantrips weren't good enough so that you could play 18 lands. So you had to play like 20, and then like you have to play, I don't know, 12 to 18 threats somewhere in there, and then you just have no cards to transform this thing. So it just sat around as a 1/1 too much of the time.
Well, we have Consider, we have Expressive Iteration, we have Jwari Disruption, which is like a card we probably want to play anyway, which also is going to be part of our mana base.
I hate that card too, but yeah.
So I am into this idea. I am going to work on Delver decks. I get why you're skeptical, because Delver has underperformed in every format except Legacy and its initial iteration in Standard, where, again, it had tremendous support.
Dude, it had everything in that Standard.
It had Gataxian Probe, it had Mana Leak,
Snapcaster, Geist.
Snapcaster Mage, Vapor Snag. I mean, it was just absolutely loaded in terms of support. And that's not the scenario we have now, but I do think the cards are very good around it. I think there is a good unsummon to play alongside with it, which is important. A slightly better shock. I don't know how much that's going to matter, but a lot of scrying going on in these scenarios, which these decks always do appreciate. And I also think that top end, being able to go to Moonveil Regent, that seems really strong to me in the scenario where we're playing all these cheap spells and can just kind of pop off. So obviously that doesn't play particularly well with counter magic, but the only counter magic I'm really interested in is like Jawari Disruption. I want to shorten these games, not play them forever. And I think there is some potential.
Yeah, the counter spells are super narrow. You have Negate and Disdainful Stroke and stuff like that. It's like,
yeah, that's not what I'm trying to do. At least in game 1. In game 2, we can look more at that kind of option.
Yeah, for sure. But if you're just like, oh, well, I have this 1 mana 3-power flyer and like a 4 mana 4-power flyer and Expressive Iteration and some spot removal spells like that could potentially work. I could potentially buy that. Thermo Alchemist, I think, just stinks. So I would want a different 2 and 3 mana threat probably.
Well, I will say there are other 2 and 3 mana threats that could potentially scale. There's like the Bloodthirsty Adversary, which plays well with all the spells we're playing in our deck. Maybe the haste matters a lot. There's Spectral Adversary, which instant speed is good, but I'm less sold on that mana.
Oh, this is the 2-drop vampire.
Yeah. These are the mythic cycles. Okay. So I think that's not bad.
It's not bad. It's not good either.
Mostly agree with that. So if you think back to early versions of Delver of Secrets decks, they were often based around like curiosity effects. There's Suspicious Stowaway, which you have already decided you hate. So probably not going to push you on that one. But if you just need to keep putting cards in your hand, maybe that's the way you need to do it with this Delver of Secret decks. I think there's options out there and I'm going to explore them. I've been disappointed by Delver in the past, but this all looks a little bit better for Delver than a lot of the other times it's floated around the consciousness. And I'm also excited to see what it can do in Historic, although we have better Delver of Secrets there now in the form of Dragon's Rage Channeler. So
yeah. And even in Legacy, DRC has
it's better.
Almost entirely supplanted Delver. And Delver's a blue card too, right? And you have Brainstorm. It's just like, DRC's way better. There are some decks that still play like 2 Delvers or whatever, just have more 1-drops, but
If we had access to DRC in Standard, I would not be making such a hard case for Delver, but it is the best version of this we have access to in a lower power environment, and I think it might just work this time.
Finally, we have Eaten Alive, B, sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature or pay 3B, exile target creature or planeswalker. Village Rites, Eaten Alive works so well with Jadar.
Yes, it does.
It just like makes the Decayed Zombie every turn. And I think that these decks are going to be really good.
I think so too. I think this was an important part of the puzzle. I love that it's exile removal in a format that does seem to use the graveyard quite a bit. And these effects, I'm always appreciative when they're around. I've played more Bone Splinters than most, I think. And I am glad Eaten Alive is an option for this format.
Yeah, card is very nice. Again, I wrote about Ghoulcaller's Harvest, and this showed up in a few of my deck lists. And I think it's just pretty solid, pretty good.
So we got in a little bit under 42 hours, which is good. That's what I was originally estimating this would take. How do you feel this now wrapped, recorded? Are you as stoked for this set as I am?
Yeah, I was already having a pretty good time building decks, and it's nice to talk to someone else who's kind of working on opposite stuff as you, because like now I have a bunch of other ideas for decks that I want to build.
I feel the same way. I want to go through and monkey with your ideas a little bit, do some more stuff in the same veins I've been talking about. And it just feels like I have a deck building explosion welling up inside of me that like I just haven't been able to let out because I knew it wouldn't matter, quite frankly, over the last, 5 sets since the release of Throne of Eldraine. It's just like, I could work on this, but it's not going to make a difference. And we're ultimately going to end up back in the same place. So why bother? And it's so nice not to feel that way. And maybe even like want to play a standard tournament. If it happened right now, I would sign up, which I have not felt that way in a very long time.
Nice. So. That's good. I don't know if I'm, trying to play any tournaments or whatever. We'll see.
Okay.
It's just like the conditions of it, it's just like soulless to.
No, I understand all that. For me, it would be about testing the viability of an idea that I was really in love with and just putting it up against what other people are trying to do. And that 1 week before the metagame really solidifies it's always the most exciting time. And it didn't exist when Eldraine was present because the metagame was still there. Like nothing was ever going to supplant that stuff. You could monkey around with it. You could find decks that maybe would be on the same level, but those decks were always going to be there. And like what's left over now? To me, the best thing that remains is the Asika's Chariot, Jaspera Sentinel, Magna, Goldspan Dragon package. Like that is the PowerPoint that's left. And that's like good. I think you and I were one of the first ones to get hyped about that whole package. But it doesn't feel oppressive in any way and totally manageable.
Yeah, there are other things that you might want to be doing now instead of like, oh, I guess I just have to do this because it's the best thing. So There's a lot of room for exploration. There's a lot of cool cards, a lot of sideways stuff. And there are also packages of things that are as good as the best thing. Right.
Yes.
So
synergies that can compete with that.
Yeah. This is just ideal. Right. And the mana's okay. Like we need another set of enemy duels, I think. But I mean, even without that, I think it's still completely fine because at least for the green decks, right? If you're playing like Golgari or Simic, you have different sorts of mana fixing, right? And Jesper Sentinel is a large part of that. But it has not felt bad building decks so far.
I agree with you. Looking forward to doing it some more. Looking forward to coming back next week with our top X list.
Top 13, baby.
Top 13 for Innistrad. We're Vorthoses now, in case you all haven't figured that out.
I mean, we could always figure out 3 honorable mentions,
We almost always do 13 anyway, whether we call it a top 13 or not. So I now we're going to have honorable mentions on our 13, I bet. That's going to happen.
No, we can't do that. We can only talk about 13 Magic cards.
Okay. Join us next week. 13 Magic cards.
Game.
Good luck.